Have you been wondering whether our US boycott efforts in 2025 have actually been making a difference? It's been difficult to get clear numbers out of the United States. For me, my benchmark has always been listening to the struggling American business owners, restaurant owners, and the tourism officials who are openly asking Canadians to come back. But I'm not an expert. I'm just a YouTuber with a loud cat. But today, I'm going to show you a conversation I had with Wayne Smith. He's a professor at the Institute of Hospitality and Tourism Research at the Toronto Metropolitan University. You might remember him from Matt Galloway's CBC interview I featured a few videos ago. In this discussion, he helps to break down the real impact that isn't being widely reported yet in the media. And that's what makes this conversation so important. So I'm genuinely excited to share this one with everybody. Before we get into it, today's photo was taken by my mom in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island this past fall. Thanks, Mom, for sending us over. I still have over 100 photos from my parents' Eastern Canada trip, so you'll be seeing the rest of them throughout 2026. Okay, let's get into the discussion that I had with Wayne Smith from the Toronto Metropolitan University. All right. So Wayne, I really want to thank you for joining me. And, I've talked to you during my early days of my channel. I think back in June, you and I had a conversation on email. And I really appreciate you supporting my channel all the way up until now. So just for the audience in case they don't know who you are, can you do can you do a quick introduction on who you are and what sector you're from?
My name is Wayne Smith. I'm a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm also the director of the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. I've been a professor for 21 years. I've worked in both Canada and the United States. And one of the things that I really liked about your channel is you have an interest that's similar to mine. We don't always agree, but that's okay. You have an interest. I've been thinking about this stuff for 25 years. And to have other people now looking at it and actually think it's interesting, it's kind of fascinating to me. I enjoy that part.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And, I think when I heard your interview on CBC, it really kind of resonated with me because you were speaking about a lot of things that the mainstream media on both sides of the border don't really talk about too much, right? I mean, especially south of the border, it's always going to be about the tariffs, and north of the border, they do mention the 51st state. They do mention the cross-border traffic. Not being normally what it is, right? But you did mention a lot of things such as credit cards, spending, taxes, and other sectors that we might not be thinking of, right? So I really want to use this call as an educational purpose for myself and also for the viewers, just to kind of pick your brain and maybe point out things that the media might not be getting that is going to be useful for the audience as well as myself for reporting in the future, right? So I guess the first question I have is it's always been bothering me when it comes to cross-border numbers. And, the US numbers, they'll be, definitely lower than what the Canadian numbers are reporting. They might report like 15 to 20% less border traffic going into the US. And then Canadian media might be reporting 30 to 43%, right? So there's always a bit of a discrepancy, right? I want to, as a tourism expert, like, what's your take on that? Like, what should we be listening to, I guess?
Okay, there's a couple things with the border numbers. You got to remember they count every crossing.
Right.
So if you're going across, just to get gas and come back, that's a crossing. Or if you're going to work every day. So someone who lives in Windsor and works in Detroit, you're going to have 5 visits from that person, right. 5 crossings, right? Because they'll cross forward and then they'll cross back the same day. And there's a lot of Canadians who live on the Canadian side and work on the American side, and a lot less, but a little bit vice versa. So you're seeing a lot. And then every transport truck that crosses the border, once again, that gets counted as well. And we, as much as we would like to think that, we are reducing our trade with the United States, it's still a huge, huge number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a big part of our economy. So when you start looking at that, and most of the time when we're shipping to the US, it's going by truck. So this is why you're starting to see those numbers. The reason they're not coalescing is one that I can't explain to you. to be honest with you. You would think they should count the same number of people going over and the same number of people coming back.
Yeah, that's what I would think, but it's yeah.
It's also yeah. So my guess is, and this is purely speculation on my part, my guess is the U.S. is taking out less of the cross-border.
Mm-hmm.
So that number or they're counting more cross-border in some way. I can't figure it out. The numbers don't.
Yeah.
I will tell you right now, Stats Canada is actually known as probably one of the best statistics agencies anywhere in the world and the most accurate. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I think you will see that will be. I would believe the Canadian numbers before I'd believe the U.S. numbers in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as well. I mean, StatsCan, if I see a report on StatsCan numbers, I would believe those more than, what's coming out of, like, say, Washington State or something like that, right? So it's just been, I mean, I've been doing the channel since April, and it just kind of mind boggles me that both sides of the border have drastically different numbers. In the media in BC, where I'm from, they'll say one number anywhere between, like, say, 35 to 43%, but then the Washington State News will say it's like 25%, right? So, and I get it. I mean, every, like you said, every truck that goes across, every worker that might live in BC but then crosses over to the US to work, that counts as one, right? So that part I get. One other thing I have been really recently hearing lately is credit card numbers, right? And that kind of intrigued me a little bit more because credit card numbers, in my opinion, and you can tell me if I'm right or not, might be more of a better indicator when it comes to the amount of Canadians that are not going to the U.S. So am I correct on that? Or
yeah, credit card numbers are probably the best indicator that's available to us.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of reasons for that. One is that there's actually two sets of numbers that would be ideal to look at is the credit card numbers and then the tax revenue generated.
Right.
But the tax revenue generated isn't going to come out for months upon months upon months.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to always be a lagging figure as opposed to the credit card, which I can, if I had enough money, I can call Visa today and get credit card data.
Right.
So, and given the fact that the vast majority of our purchases are now plastic, it makes a whole lot of sense to do that, where you're going to catch the vast majority of the spending within the destination. We used to do old fashioned. We used to ask people, how much did you spend on your vacation? And when we actually compared that to their credit card data, that could be up to 35% difference.
Right.
People would underestimate how much they spent on vacation, which is, from a tourism point of view, great.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes getting real numbers really difficult. So the credit card data is actually the most accurate data for understanding. And the reason is because tourism dollars are export dollars. So this is really hard for a lot of people to understand, because we usually think of export dollars as, I make the car in Canada, we send it to the States, someone from the States buys it in the States, and then the money comes for the car purchases comes back to Canada. Where tourism is a little bit different is, you have a Canadian, they travel to the States, they spend their money there. So the money is spent in the US and then the Canadian comes back, but the product is built and developed in the US for that Canadian audience. So it's an export dollar.
Right.
And export dollars count a lot more into an economy than import dollars do in a lot of ways, because otherwise you're just recycling money in the economy. So if I was, for example, the domestic tourism, if I'm going to go on a trip to Disney, well, I could have bought a TV too.
Yeah.
So that money was probably going to get spent in that economy anyway, where export dollars are new monies into the economy that wouldn't have been spent otherwise in your economy. And that's why they're so much more valuable.
Mm-hmm. It's new money to the United States. And it's because right now what's happening and what I'm seeing is that, domestic tourism, it's not filling the gap that we Canadians and international tourists used to spend in the U.S. But is basically putting money in from one pocket and just taking out, put in the other pocket, right? So I I'm wondering, with the credit card spending that is, well, first of all, I mean, how can we get this credit card numbers? Like, in terms, I mean, the only place I can really get it is waiting for a U.S. report to kind of state that they're 40% down or 50% down, right? But I guess this information is not available to the general public.
No, this is, you actually have to purchase from the credit card companies, and it's very expensive. That's why most states don't do it,
Right.
because it's an extremely expensive purchase. They're really, really accurate. And especially when you're using them at a broad scale like this, where you're looking at a statewide. So you're basically looking at anyone who has a Canadian postal code goes in and they tell you how much money they spent in different areas.
Right.
So the good thing about to put people's mind at ease, they don't actually give any data about the person. They just give how much money was spent by each postal or zip code.
Yeah, and those are the numbers that I'm sure everybody wants to see, right? Because obviously with our boycott movement that we're doing in 2025 and even now, I'm sure everybody wants to see the progress that is happening. And I think, I mean, I'm hoping that we get more information on credit card details in 2026, but obviously it's just we're just gonna have to wait for the U.S. media to see if they're gonna release it or not, right? So,
yeah, a lot of U.S. states don't collect it because it is so expensive. Yeah. It's one of the most expensive sort of data purchasing you're going to find. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those. And from a state perspective, they get a lot of the information from the sales tax. They don't necessarily care about the spend. They care about the tax revenue generation.
Right. So moving on to the tax revenue, right? I mean, I did a video a little while ago, a couple of videos ago, in terms of, where was it? I forgot where it was, but basically, they needed to, a city needed to make some changes in terms of staffing because of their budget. And I'm just assuming, but I'm assuming it probably revolves around the tourism tax or the lack of the amount of tax that they got from 2025. So maybe you can explain to the audience, and even in myself, how does that work? Like, we obviously spent a lot less last year in the United States. And they didn't get as much tax money from us. So what happens to them in 2026?
Okay, let me just take you through two examples. I got you.
Sure.
Las Vegas. Okay, I'll take you through a 2024 example. So approximately, and Las Vegas only does this but on a state basis. So we're looking at it as a state, but the tourism taxes generated in Las Vegas nearly $100 billion in 2024.
Wow.
So if you're to do this on a per household basis, it's basically saving just over $3,000 per household. So about 34% of the entire Nevada's general fund comes from these tourism taxes. Mm-hmm. So basically 1 out of 3 tax dollars in Nevada comes from tourism.
Right.
So just to give you, that was about $2.4 billion in industry specific taxes. So that's a good chunk of change. So just to give you a sense, the room tax alone pays for about 35% of public education.
Wow.
And about 28% goes to, believe it or not, infrastructure and stadiums. So this is sort of, they're using a lot of these revenues to develop the product and develop, the education and pay for a lot of the things that they couldn't afford otherwise. Right. Think about this. If everyone's property tax went up $3,000, what would that do to the economy as a whole? Right. So let me give you one more example, just because it's a fun one. Orlando, right? And here's the idea of it, is that Orlando, and they actually do it based on Orange County, Florida, which is the county that surrounds Orlando. But you're talking about, they reduced the annual tax burden, according to 2024, 2025 data, $10,200 per household.
Wow.
So across the Central Florida region, the average savings, so across Central Florida, is just over $7,000. Mm-hmm. The tourism development tax there, also they call it the bed tax, is basically reached a record 384.6 million in Orange County in 24-25.
Wow.
So, for example, most of the money from there goes into public safety, education, and infrastructure.
Right.
So policing, education, and infrastructure. And that's a big, big deal. So with both Nevada and Florida are zero state income tax places. They couldn't do that without tourism revenues coming in.
Right.
That just with that, the ability to be a zero tax state is next to impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So
does that mean
it's a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, 2025 was a bad year for them for taxes, right? I mean, obviously, with all the boycotts and
Well, it's going to be yes.
Yeah, so does that mean they're gonna start to feel the effect in the 2026 budget? And I'm assuming we're gonna hear more about it in the news, probably like Q2 and Q3, right?
Yeah. So you'll start hearing about it sort of late February when budget proposals start coming up, and they find all these shortfalls. I can tell you right now, I have friends at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. They're already seeing cuts.
Wow.
Because they know the revenue's not going to be there.
Yeah.
So it's one of these things of tourism taxes are really popular to politicians because raising taxes on people who don't live there and don't vote for you is easy.
Yeah.
You don't want to raise taxes on the people who actually can live there and vote for you.
That's true. Yeah.
So if tourism taxes are always much higher, and tourists pay a much higher proportion of the tax bill than they come into and use the services. And it's the same everywhere. It's the same even in Canada. You know, if you take a look at, Toronto and Vancouver, I'll use because I know you're from that area. They just did a whole bed tax that's going to pay for a big chunk of the World Cup. And do you think that tax is going to go down after the World Cup?
Probably not. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to know because I mean, obviously, like I've been trying to get information that's outside of the normal mainstream media, and to know that our efforts in 2025 are going to have, I don't want to say extreme measures for 2026 or extreme issues, but at least I know and feel better that, hey, our efforts in 2025, yes, it's going to start to really affect them in other areas outside of just hospitality and restaurants and shops. It's going to start to hurt, their tax revenue and what government funded programs and everything else that they have. So I appreciate
and it goes beyond that. It actually goes beyond that. This is the whole economic impact. So this is now going to go all the way down. So I'll take Las Vegas, for example. Mm-hmm. Because there's less tourists, they're getting less tourism revenue, but then all the people are getting laid off or reduced hours. So they don't have the spending power to spend in the economy.
Right.
So beyond that, you have the tourism taxes, which is a big chunk of money, but then you have a bunch of people who's had their hours cut or got laid off or let go. Mm-hmm. They are obviously not going to have the spending power that they had while working.
Right.
So that money then starts to leak out of the economy as well. So, and then you'll have people leaving the destination because if I can't find a job in Las Vegas or I can't find a job in Orlando, I'm going to start looking for jobs in other places. Yep. So then you get a net migration leaving. And for example, Florida for the first time is starting to see a net loss in population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did a few reports early on in Las Vegas where a lot of workers were starting to get laid off, either going from part-time or full-time to part-time, or even part-time to just on call. So then that was, I think, in July I was reporting that. So I imagine now it's definitely going to be a lot worse, and moving forward, if things don't improve, it's going to be even worse. So like you said, it's going to be a net loss in terms of even employment, I guess, too. So.
Yeah, it all carries downstream. People can't afford rent. They can't afford the landlord to pay the landlord. The landlord doesn't get the revenue, and now they have property sitting vacant, or they're not getting paid for their. So all these things has this downward pressure that's going to occur. And then you look at the US economy as a whole, it's pretty dicey for a lot of people. You look at the number of layoffs going on, and they calculate unemployment very differently than Canadians do unemployment.
Right.
So when you see their 4.6 number, it's a very different number than how Canada calculates it.
Got it. So, I mean, that's great explanation. I mean, I've kind of done my own bit of research when it comes to taxes and revenue, but I really appreciate you explaining that to me as well as everybody listening to it right now. One other thing I wanted to ask is, like, we know about the hotels, the restaurants, and the typical tourist attractions and typical tour places that are struggling when it comes to trying to get people to visit. In your opinion, I mean, and research, is there any other sectors that have been affected that we're not really noticing right now?
Oh, are you talking about generating revenue? Obviously, the liquor industry.
Oh yeah,
that's a big one. But you're also talking about the construction industries having a really difficult time in the U.S. Lumber supplies is a big issue.
Right.
You're talking about, as you're building more of these data centers, electricity becomes an increasing issue. So you see a lot of places, if you're looking down in Alabama or Mississippi, where they're building some of these data centers for cheap labor, the electricity prices are going way up.
Right.
And then how are you generating that electricity is a big question. So all these things start to come into effect, into play and tourism is, the thing about tourism is it's a bellwether, what we call bellwether industry. So when the economy is going to go bad, tourism stocks are usually the first to fall.
Right.
Because what's the first thing you cut out of your budget when you're not feeling economically sound? You cut out travel, right?
Yeah.
I can't afford this trip this year. And usually, so that's what drops. Tourism drops first. And then you see the economy lagging behind it. And it's a really good indicator. On the other hand, it's also an indicator of the economy starting to become good again because people start taking trips again.
That's true. Yep.
I can finally do it. Okay, I'm going to go do it. So, tourism is very much a canary in a coal mine. How tourism is doing is usually a pretty good indication from a North American perspective how healthy the economy is.
What's your thoughts on this year? I mean, we're in 2026 already, and we're only 5 days into it, and we already have so much stuff going on. But when it comes to tourism and the United States, what's your outlook and what's your opinion on what's going to happen in the U.S. this year? I mean, we have the World Cup, right? So I mean, I think the U.S. is banking on the World Cup. My thoughts, I think it's not going to go as good as they feel. But what is your thoughts on 2026 in the U.S. for tourism?
Well, the thing I want to express is that tourism is a safety industry. If you don't feel safe and secure as a person, you're not going to go there. Yeah. So we see as there becomes more and more idea that, okay, I have to get my photo and my prints done. And now I have to, and what kind of visas am I going to need? Or am I worried about having to carry my passport everywhere I go? One of the things that drives me nuts, when I go somewhere, I want to lock my passport away in the room so I can't lose it.
Yeah.
But, now you're in a position where you basically have to carry your passport everywhere if you have any semblance of sense. So, every time you're seeing more and more of these kind of things, what you're doing is you're taking people who, okay, I'm willing to take that risk because different people have different risk tolerances. So some people will look at a street and say, oh, that's perfectly safe. And then other people will look at that street and say, oh, I see all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to go down that street. But the more barriers you put up, the more things that occur, the more people are going to look at that street and say, I don't want that street. Yeah. I don't want to go down there. So you're creating a situation where your people aren't feeling safe. They're not feeling secure. And even more importantly, they're not feeling welcome as a result. If you go to a place where you don't feel safe, you're not going to feel welcomed. I don't care what they're doing. There's some wonderful people and wonderful places in the US, but if you're not going to feel secure in your person, you're not going to feel welcomed.
Yeah. You mentioned about carrying your passport. I mean, I think about that. I mean, if I were to go to Hawaii, and I mean, Hawaii is a place that I used to go to frequently, and I'm going on or I'm walking on Waikiki Beach. I can't imagine carrying my passport with me, right? And it's just one of those things where, like, okay, well, if I'm going to go jump in the water, what do I do with my passport? Do I leave it on the beach? Do I
Yeah,
have somebody there watching it? And because in these days, you need to have your passport, right? Because you can't,
yeah,
I'm not one to take risks, right? So if I were to be in Waikiki, I would bring my passport, and if I don't bring it and something happens, then obviously that's a worst case or a worst situation for anybody. Deciding to travel there and not having your passport on you, right? Like I'm like you, I lock it in the safe and I just leave it there, right? So
yeah. That's what most people would do, right? But
yeah,
it's once again, I think a lot of people, you're still going to have a population or a group of people that have to go down there for work. They have to go down there for family obligations. Like we're too integrated to turn it all off, right?
yeah, yeah,
But you also see a case of where people are limiting where they're going or how they're traveling and how much time they're spending down there. These are all things that are going to do. Like I lived in the States for 15 years. I have people I truly, truly love and admire down there.
mhm,
And I have a couple friends who are in their 70s, that they can't necessarily travel to me,
yeah,
but I would love to go see them,
mhm,
you know,
yeah,
but we all have to make our choices.
yeah,
And what your risk tolerance is versus someone else's risk tolerance can be very different.
mhm,
I personally, from my perspective, is that, you know, while I don't think I would have a problem and there would probably be a 0.005% chance, is that worth it?
yep.
Right. And that's a question that each individual has to answer for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're right. I mean, I've been saying on my channel, 9 out of 10 people will probably be fine when they go through pre-clearance and stuff, right? But
Mhm.
I just don't want to risk it. But at the same time as well, it's there's other factors for me too. Like I just for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable spending my money in the U.S. knowing that, hey, potentially that this business owner is part of the reason why we're in this situation by voting for Trump, right? So those are my reasons. But then obviously safety is a big one as well. So
Well, and the thing about it is that the best protest you can ever do to anyone is vote with your wallet.
yeah,
You know, the nice thing about being in our system is we get to choose what we spend our money on.
yeah,
And voting with your wallet is the one way that's going to make every government down south take notice.
yeah,
When they don't have tax revenues, when they don't have the same number of people, when the jobs go down, all of a sudden the politicians get a lot more heat on them when
mhm,
they can't fund education, when they can't fund policing, when they can't fund infrastructure.
mhm,
And they're saying to the people, we have to raise taxes in order to pay for these things. You think down in Las Vegas, if they don't make enough money to pay for Allegiant Stadium, for example, off the tourism taxes, where is that money going to come from? That's
yeah,
going to come from your local taxpayers.
yeah. And I'm guessing we're probably going to be hearing those reports, like you said, in February, March area when it's announced that, hey, taxes need to be raised or there's not enough for this or this is going to be cut. So I guess that's the next thing I'm going to be looking out for on my channel. So
Yeah, you're going to see cuts before you'll see raises, but yeah,
yeah,
it'll be real. It's going to be a really kind of interesting thing because it
yeah,
affects the environment as a whole.
yeah. So to flip this around a bit, I mean, we've been talking mainly on, the decrease in travel to the US. 2025 has been huge for Canada, right? And what do you see for Canada in 2026 when it comes to tourism?
Well, this is an excellent opportunity for Canada. It started last summer. You had a lot of people. If Canadians feel like they're getting good value for dollar delivered to them,
Mhm.
if they feel like they're getting good experiences traveling domestically, we have a chance to establish new patterns. So if you're in Quebec, instead of going to Old Orchard, you go to Halifax. And once you establish patterns, and this is the scary thing for the US, because Canadians had certain power. You looked at, for example, the Premier of Ontario, who talked about, I went down to Florida every year for the last 20 years. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, now he's saying, I'm breaking that pattern. Well, what if he finds a product he likes better or
Yeah.
he finds more comfortable? He's going to keep doing that.
Mhm.
So think of how many Canadians you have who are now breaking patterns and saying, listen, I'm gonna go spend my winter on Victoria Island or Vancouver Island and around Victoria, as opposed to going down to the States.
Yep.
You've seen a ton of news about that. So, Canada has a great product. We have to make sure that we're treating people well, that we're delivering a high quality product that people are seeing that they're going to get value for money. If we do that, this is an excellent opportunity to keep a lot of that money in our own economy.
Yeah. And I don't think it's just our money. I mean, what from my channel and what I've been seeing is that a lot of international tourists, whether from Europe or Australia or anywhere else in the world, who normally do trips to the US, have been redirecting their flights to Canada and their trips to Canada. And I've featured a few people on my channel. They sent me backdrops. You know how I do the backdrop things and whatever. Quite a few of them have actually sent them over saying that, normally they would go to the States, but they decided to explore Nova Scotia, or they decided to go to Toronto or Alberta or whatever else, right? So that's money that, how I see it is that that's money that we would have not gotten before that we are now getting now into Canada. So
one of the best things that we saw, and we'll see this during the World Cup too, when you looked at the World Series and you looked behind and you looked at the crowd at Toronto games, you literally saw the world.
Yeah.
You saw an entire world of nations, of people at a stadium cheering for each other, being in the same room together. That sent a really powerful message about how people are welcome here and how the door is open in Canada for people. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. You can come here and be accepted and be welcomed.
Yeah.
That was a strong message. And I think we're going to see that even more during the World Cup. I think that's going to be the big power of the World Cup, is showing not Canada, but showing the world how diverse this country really is.
Yeah. And not only being diverse, but being able to accept everybody that's coming in, right? So, and I think the U.S., when the games are in the U.S., they're going to have a bit of a problem with that, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but they already have a lot of restrictions on countries and people coming in. So if I'm from one of those countries, I'm not going to be wanting to come in and watch a game with all of this potential risk coming in, right? So I think Canada has an advantage there.
Yeah. With the new rules and regulations right now, there's quite a few countries in the World Cup that if they haven't applied for their visa already, they're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Even for next summer.
Yeah.
So it just with the time it takes to get one. And then, there's a lot of people who are going to be afraid. Like, I'm going to pay how many thousands of dollars to come over where a border guard can just deny me entry. These are all things that's a lot of risk that you're asking people to take on to come visit you.
Not only risk, but a lot of extra costs, especially with all these visas and, $250 fee, or what are the other fees that are being tacked on, right? So,
yeah, and that's the thing. And the other challenge is that they're not communicating very well about what all needs to be done. So when you had a bunch of snowbirds going down, some were getting told, oh, we have to do the fingerprinting, we have to do the paperwork and all that sort of stuff at the border. And other people say, oh, don't worry about it, not fine. Well, what happens when you're down there and you happen to get into one of those ICE things where they're checking everyone?
Yeah.
What if you got bad advice at the border? These are all, like, because they're not being coherent and telling people exactly what they need to do to be it. Once again, it increases the risk level way too much.
I did a report on that a little while ago, because I think some of the snowbirds, they crossed into the border, they had their paperwork ready, and the CBP guard told them that you don't need this, right? So you're right, that's going to cause confusion, because the way I saw it is that you're going to have snowbirds going down, or even anybody in there that's going that, thinks they require the form. They're going to go down. They're not going to have that form. And you're right. If they do get stopped, they're not going to have the right paperwork. And it's just a mess that I wouldn't want anyone to go through, right? So,
well, it's because they introduced so much so quickly.
Yeah.
That no one has an idea of exactly how it all should work.
Yeah.
It's just And because you have so many countries and so many regulations, and the regulations are changing so drastically from country to country, it's tough for the border guards to keep up with all of it.
Exactly. And just to think, we're only 5 days into 2026 right now, and it's crazy what's going on right now. So I'm really interested to see what happens once the World Cup comes around, and really kind of see what the turnout is, right? So,
and the Olympics the year after, and the 250th birthday of the U.S.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that this should be a golden age for tourism for that country.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to see what 2026 has in store for everybody. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you joining me, Wayne. And, you helped to kind of answer and educate me on a few things. And I'm just a newbie with a channel. So, I mean, I learned a lot from this call. And, I think moving forward, I mean, I'd love to have you on my channel again, especially if there's any new developments or, new updates on the boycott and things like that. So, yeah, you're welcome to come back anytime, Wayne.
Always happy to chat with you.
Yeah, and thank you as well for being a supporter of my channel from the beginning. I remember your first email to me, and it's kind of funny because I was a little bit too nervous to do an interview back then, but I think I'm starting to get used to it now. So, really appreciate talking to you again. We'll definitely be in touch.
Yeah, definitely so.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Wayne, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, have a good one, and
stay on the line. We'll chat a bit more. I'll just end the interview here. Thanks very much, Wayne.